Module 14, emotional triggers and that emotional chain of events that follows. This is such an important part of this work that we are doing. Starting to identify the emotional triggers that we all have on a daily basis, and instead of ignoring them or squishing them down with food or telling yourself you'll deal with them at a later time, or just allowing those emotions to just stay bubbling away inside you, which is what we normally do, and actually starting to recognize when something has happened that has created this emotional shift in you. So emotional triggers are exactly that. Emotional triggers are things that move us from feeling okay in that moment to then having an emotional shift, and that can be feeling angry, feeling frustrated, feeling sad, feeling happy, whatever emotion it is. So emotional triggers are things that happen external to us that trigger an internal response that change the way that we feel. And cognitive behavior therapy is all linked into the way we feel, the way we think, and the way we act. So part of this trigger work is about exploring our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviours, but it's also about understanding what is the driver, what drives and what kicks off that chain of events, which is feelings, thoughts, beliefs, actions. So this week's module is run a little bit differently. There is still a workbook attached to this, but I'm going to be doing the training, if you like, actually in the video. So if you print your workbooks out, I would say go over, print your workbooks out, or have it available, because I'm going to talk you through the techniques that I'm going to teach you. Now, these techniques feel a little bit clunky at the start, but the more you practice them, the more you make the time to recognize when you've had this emotional shift in your day, whether that's through, I had a day yesterday where we're supposed to have a car delivered today, and we got an email to say it's not coming until next week, and trying to sort that out, trying to actually reach a person on the phone took me nearly 3 hours, and the stress that I was experiencing, which is really unusual for me. So that was an emotional trigger. I went from feeling absolutely fine and until I read that email, and then I couldn't get hold of them. So I spent a little bit of time last night actually sitting there and exploring what that was about for me, and that really touched my not being seen and not being heard stuff, and that frustration I used to feel as a kid. So my emotional response to that situation was probably a bit out of context, and it's not the first time. We're going to this world of online, aren't we? So it's much, whilst you get a slicker process up front because it's automated, the actual being able to speak to somebody about a problem gets harder and harder, and that really frustrates me, and that invited me into a really turbulent level of stress, and I had to really sort of step back from that and take some time to work through exactly what I'm going to teach you today, because it's a really, really valuable process to learn. But the more you practice it, the less clunky it becomes, and it becomes a technique that you go to the moment you notice the trigger, because that's the ideal. The ideal is that you get to the point that if you notice that someone or something has created an emotional shift in you, that you learn to be able to almost press pause at that moment and step back rather than trigger, react, which is what we often do. And that in that moment of reaction, the brain has kind of just created a story. We haven't taken the time to press pause and actually step back and think about what we're thinking. It's like trigger, feeling, thinking, react. There's just no time. We've not allowed ourselves any time to sit back, that whole count to 10 analogy. And this technique that I'm going to teach you today is going to encourage you to have a method of being able to press pause and not react in the moment, and to actually process what is going on for you, which is hugely, hugely valuable. Also, as we start to do some of the other work that we're doing, the ideal is as you start to become less reactive to things, and so you feel calmer, and when we feel calmer, we're less likely to be triggered in the first place. So the more you do this work, it's going to help you up front in terms of you're going to feel calmer, therefore you're less triggered, but also when you are triggered, you are going to have a way of being able to settle yourselves down. Not 100% of the time, because we're human and it just doesn't work like that. But the more you do this, that percentage will get, the percentage of you trigger and reacting will get less and less. So today what I'm going to teach you is I'm going to teach you the backward step technique, and I'm also going to teach you the emotional chain of events. So once we're triggered, that chain of events that often follows, which then leads into a behaviour. So when we start to think about our coping mechanisms, food, alcohol, shopping, sex, gambling, all of these instant gratification things that we turn to make ourselves feel better, to cope. Sometimes they're punishment, you know, it depends what side of the camp that you're on, but being able to clearly see the stages that you're going through that lead out the other side to an unhelpful behaviour is going to be so powerful for you. So let's start by talking about the backward step technique, and later in this video I will actually be completing a backward step technique with you and also show you the chain of events as well. So the backward step technique, what that's about, what I want you to use as an example is the last time you overate or ate in a way that was kind of against the way you want to be eating, or choose a situation that the outcome wasn't quite what you wanted, okay? And when you print out your form or you do it online, you'll see like 5 boxes. So the first column on the template that's in your workbook, the first column is the backward step technique. So in that first box, I want you to write down the situation that happened. So my situation was I'm sat in the car at Tesco's eating a couple of cakes, okay? And then what I want you to do is just work back what was going on just before that. So for me, I'd been driving to Tesco's and somebody cut me up in the car. What was going on before that? So I think for me, it was I'd had an argument with Gary or something like that. And then what was going on before that? I'd got up late or I was tired because I hadn't had the best night's sleep. So the backward step technique is encouraging you to not just look at the action, the thing that's happened. So not just looking at the eating experience or the argument you might have had with a friend. What it starts to encourage you to do is look at what was going on before it, because quite often what's going on in our lives is we are stacking emotions, okay? So there is often prerequisites that are going on to the actual situation. There's a lovely saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. And quite often the thing that actually causes the eating isn't really where it started, is not the originator. So the backward step technique is just a way of starting to get you thinking a bit bigger, starting to think about, okay, why did this happen? Because quite often what happens when we overeat or we do an eating thing is we judge and label that eating event. We judge and label ourselves. So we stay very stuck in the actual eating event itself, and we go round in that guilt and shame cycle. And what I'm trying to encourage you to do with these techniques is actually start to go, okay, why has that happened? So the backward step technique is about teaching you to actually start to think, okay, what was going on before that? What was going on before that? And to backtrack to those 5 steps if you can. It might not be, you might get to step 3 and go, wow, that was the thing. Okay, so what we're starting to do is we're starting to flush out the root causes. And it's when we start to look at the root causes, we start to actually look for solutions for the root causes, not for the eating event itself. How much time do we invest trying to not overeat? But it still happens, because the overeating is a symptom, it's not a problem. The overeating happens as a result of as a coping mechanism for the other things that have been going on leading up to it. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's the backward step technique, and like I say, I'm gonna walk through that with you. So let's now look at the emotional chain of events.